So now we're going to have our first webinar between the European Union and Japan about the effects of COVID-19 at an international level. So we'll have our first conference from a series of conferences. So today we have coronavirus and green recovery. My name is Yukari Takamura from the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo. I've heard we have over 800 people connected right now, so there has been a big interest about this conference. And I need to say now that this series of conference is the result of the EU-Japan Strategic Partnership Agreements from 2019 to discuss politics, but also energy, climate change, economy, defense, and human-to-human connections. So there's a wide range of policy areas where we want to strengthen our relationship. By the end of last month, we had the leaders of Japan and the European Union gathering in an online conference discussing how our societies and our economies could recover from the effects of the global pandemic of COVID-19. And we would like to highlight that we have a big role to play, and this is why we are committed to strengthen our collaboration. So we have to work together, Japan and the European Union, and we would like to explore and share information on how we're tackling this adversity, and we also would like to discover how we can strengthen these relationships between Japan and the European Union. So this is the aim of this series of webinars. We will have 9 sessions, 9 webinars, including the one today, which is the kickoff webinar. And today we will have COVID-19 and the green recovery. We will discuss the concepts of recovery and the coordination we must have. But before we go into the topic, we are going to have some greetings from the side of the European Union, from the side of Japan. So first we have Koizumi Shinjiro, Minister of the Environment of Japan. Thank you.
環境大臣の小泉進次郎です。今日はこのようなご挨拶の機会をいただきありがとうございます。今私たちは新型コロナウイルスという危機と気候変動という2つの危機を迎えています。その解決のためには国際協調が不可欠です。今回 EU や日本の有識者の皆さんの参加を得て開催されているこのウェビナーも国際協調を進める上では大変有意義だと思います。コロナ後の経済社会の活動再開にあたっては、私はずっと言っていることは、従来の経済社会に戻るのではなくて、より持続可能でレジリエントなものへと変革をしていくためには、経済社会の再設計、リデザインが不可欠だということです。じゃあ、そのコロナ後の社会のリデザインとはどういうことから始まるのか、今3つの意向が大事だと考えています。1つ目の意向は脱炭素社会への移行です。例えばコロナの影響で e コマース、そしてテイクアウトなどのこのデリバリーサービスの需要が増えています。そういった配送に使われているバイク、そして車などを電気バイクや電気自動車に変えていく、そのための支援も環境省として今回予算に入れました。そして2つ目の意向が循環経済への移行を進めていくことです。日本は従来から循環型社会の取り組みをリードしてきました。レジ袋の有料化は来月から正式に始まりますが、これは EU の中では多くの国がすでに取り組んでいるところでもあります。ただ日本はペットボトルのリサイクル率にとっては 85% のリサイクル率をすでに達成していて、ここは世界でもリードしていると言えます。今後プラスチックを皮切りに循環経済、サーキュラーエコノミーへと移行を着実に進めていく、そして経済成長と雇用を創出をしていく新たなエンジンとしていきたいと考えています。そして3つ目が分散型社会への移行です。日本の国立公園は今環境省が所管をしていて、全国に34の国立公園があって300カ所にキャンプ場もあります。そしてこの日本の国立公園は日本を代表する景勝地に、国立公園の中に民家、そして旅館、ホテル、こういったものも数多く存在をしていて、地域住民の皆さんが暮らしているという特色があります。環境省ではコロナ収束後の反転攻勢に向けて、観光客の減少で打撃を受けたこの観光事業者の皆さんの雇用の維持や確保に取り組むと同時に、今テレワーク、そしてリモートワークが進んでいる中で、国立公園からもリモートワークができる国立公園ワーケーションを新しい選択肢となるように、今国立公園の魅力向上を進めています。このように脱炭素化への移行、そして循環経済への移行、そして分散社会への移行、この3つの移行によって経済社会のリデザインを実行していきたいと思います。最後に一つお知らせがあります。9月の上旬にコロナからの復興と気候変動の対策を世界中がどのように共有しているかというウェブ上での世界各国が集う場、オンラインプラットフォームを立ち上げることを予定をしています。これは今年の4月に開催されたペータースベルク気候対話で私から提案したもので、エスピノーザ条約事務局長やグティエレス事務総長、そしてまたドイツのメルケル首相も含めて前向きな賛同と支持を得ました。現在9月上旬に閣僚級でオンラインで世界各国がコロナからの復興と気候変動対策の両立をどのようにやっているか、この情報共有をする会議の開催を今事務局と連携をして詳細を詰める活動をしています。各国に招待状を送る予定ですが、今こちらにいらっしゃる EU の関係者の皆さんにはぜひこのメッセージが招待状だと思ってもらいたいと思います。もちろん正式な招待状は皆さんに発送させていただきます。今こそ日本と EU、 そして世界が協調してコロナ後の世界をリデザインしていきましょう。今日ご挨拶を機会をいただきましてありがとうございます。このウェビナーが実り良いものとなることを心から記念をしてご挨拶と変えさせていただきます。ありがとうございました。
In this webinar, we have simultaneous interpreting available, so you can choose your preferred language, either English language or Japanese language. There's a button you can click to select your preferred language. So next, we have Virginijus Sinkevičius, EU Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. COVID-19 has turned the world upside down, and it's a chance to reinvent formats. These interactions will be a great opportunity to explore new ideas, new forms of cooperation between the EU and Japan, better coordination in our strategic approach. It's important to tackle the big issues at the beginning, so I'm very happy that we are starting with recovery. The crisis is deep, but we will recover. We will build back stronger and better. But to jumpstart our economies, we need massive investments to become more resilient, to tackle climate change, to cut down on pollution, and to improve protection of the natural world. The crisis is an opportunity to build a new normal, to transform patterns of production and consumption, and therefore to deliver the future we want, greener, less wasteful, and more respectful of the planet. Europe is building that future with its new Green Deal. It decouples economic growth from the use of resources with no one left behind. The transition we want will be just and fair and in line with the need of future generations. Under the deal, public investments take a green oath to do no harm. It means renewable energy, a circular economy, sustainable food systems, and more green tech. It also means a greater concern for sustainable finance and more sustainability in corporate governance. Japan and the EU are partners. We cooperate closely in crucial areas, and we appreciate Japan's leadership on environmental policies at the G20 and in other multilateral fora. But the recovery is not just about us. We need a global green recovery for the world to become more resilient. That starts with full implementation of existing frameworks like the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. But it also includes the new global deal on biodiversity to be agreed next year. I look forward to further engagement and more cooperation with Japan on these global agendas for the environment. We can make a difference. With resolute commitment and joint determination, we can help bring about a global green recovery together. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the next keynote presentation. We have Mark van Huykelen, who is the EU Climate Change Ambassador from the European External Action Service.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me also thank from the beginning the delegation, our EU delegation in Japan, as well as the other organizers for this, for organizing this series of webinars that begins today. It runs until September and will deal with a variety of hot topics that are of great relevance to both Japan and the EU. There are plenty of domains where we can work together, and the environment and the economy are definitely core areas for that cooperation. Minister Koizumi and Commissioner Sinkevičius have already said a few things, so let me go right away into the subject of the green recovery. Governments around the world have stabilized the economy, but now we need to go from stabilization to recovery. The economic situation in 2020 looks bleak. The forecast for the European Union is negative growth of 7%, and I believe for Japan it's about 5%. We need to have a policy that gets us out of this slump and gets us back on our feet. For that, it is important that governments need to engage in major public investments and tax cuts in the year ahead and also a bit longer. There is unfortunately no other choice. Many people say, well, this year's recession will have brought a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That's correct. But first of all, this cut is going to be temporary as the economic upswing gathers pace again. And secondly, if we want to reach the Paris Agreement objectives of well below 2 degrees centigrade, then actually the cut that we will have this year would have to be repeated year after year. In other words, the pandemic, COVID, in no way lightens the homework we all have to do in coming years to decrease net emissions by the volumes required. The dark cloud of the pandemic, though, does have a silver lining. The fact that we now need to invest massively, presents us with a unique opportunity to make long-term investments that are needed and to influence through tax cuts and subsidies the behavior of firms and households. This opportunity is really unique. It is no exaggeration to say that it's a once-in-a-generation moment. The reason is simple. Once these expenditures in the context of COVID have been made, governments will be spent out. The pockets will be empty, as public debt levels will have ballooned. There is broad consensus that this package will need to be big, and on the last count that I saw, a huge amount of $10 trillion has been announced, which corresponds to roughly 8% of the GDP of the world of last year. And then the crucial issue, of course, becomes what to spend that money on. Here we are really at a fork in the road. Are we going to use the stimulus package to reflate and lock in the old economy, which is heavily reliant on fossil fuels? Or will we seize the moment to build back better and push ahead with the development of a new economy characterized by renewable energy, energy efficiency, recycled raw materials, and restored nature? What is nice about the Green Recovery Plan is that it also amounts to sound counter-cyclical policy. For counter-cyclical policy to be effective, it has to tick 3 boxes: speed, jobs, and a high multiplier. In other words, the money should be spent on shovel-ready programs, they should be labor-intensive, and they should benefit primarily the domestic economy. And a number of recent international studies have shown that the priority domains that we have for tackling climate change, such as a faster installation of solar panels, the renovation of public buildings and social housing, afforestation, or charging stations for electric transport, fit that bill very well. The answer to the question of which side or which part of the fork in the road we're going to take may look more simple than it actually is. Because when the world came out from the last big recession, 2008, the recovery decisions that were taken then, on the whole, effectively boosted the CO2 economy. It has been estimated that then only 12% of the fiscal package deployed was in favor of the new economy sectors. This time, given the unsustainability of the emissions path we're on, as well as the fact that many of the green technologies have matured and clearly require less and less intensive government support, we have to make sure that this time we get it right and that the recovery package is green. Of course, in COVID, families are preoccupied foremost with their health, with their jobs, with their income. But nevertheless, going green would also strike a positive chord with public opinion. In a poll in 14 countries published in April, nearly 2/3 of respondents agree that government measures aimed at economic recovery should prioritize action on climate change. In Japan and in Europe, that figure was around 70%. In the United States of today, it was 60%. And in China, close to 90%. For us in the European Union, the proposition that the recovery be green is actually a no-brainer, because last year already, well before the outbreak of COVID, we had determined that what we call the Green Deal would become our growth strategy, along with digitalization. The Green Deal is a comprehensive program that encompasses more than climate action, but climate action clearly is the lead theme to which most efforts are devoted. But the Green Deal is also about promoting the circular economy, preserving biodiversity, a safe and sustainable food chain, and on each of those, there are policy plans being implemented. The deep recession we're now going through prompts us to accelerate the rollout of that strategy. 2 weeks ago, the European Commission, i.e. the executive of the European Union, unveiled its proposals for the EU budget for the next 7 years. Roughly 300 billion euro will be earmarked for climate and related policies. And on top of that, by way of a special post-COVID-19 scheme, the so-called Next Generation EU instrument, an additional sum of more or less 300 billion will be spent on Green Deal goals in 2021 and 2022. Furthermore, our development bank, the European Investment Bank, will undertake to support in the 10 years ahead 1 trillion euro of green investments. And then last but not least, there are the stimulus packages announced by the individual member states, such as last week's announcement by Germany of 130 billion recovery, 58 billion by France, 28 billion by the Netherlands, and I can go on. And all of these national programs will have prominent green components. Professor, I'm not going to go into the details of these various elements. That is of limited interest to our Japanese colleagues. But what matters instead is to get a big picture of the European recovery strategy and its overriding green color. Public spending is only part of that big picture. The economic transformation that climate action and other aspects of the Green Deal require mean that we have to do more to mobilize the private sector, because the efforts that are needed clearly exceed the capacity of the public sector. Private investment is of the essence, and I think that the other speakers will say more on that. Private investment is of the essence, and it therefore has to be steered in the right direction through a regulatory framework and price signals. That is why we have proposed a climate law that will anchor the goal of climate neutrality in 2050. We will propose a further tightening of emission cuts for 2030, which will also translate then into a more ambitious NDC. We're going to extend our emissions trading scheme to more sectors, and we have also tabled a single-use plastics tax. We believe that the COVID crisis must not be wasted, and we hope that other countries, notably other G20 countries that together account for 80% of all emissions in the world, will find inspiration in the plans and actions of the EU, and we're obviously happy to engage in deeper discussions, especially with Japan, with whom we enjoy strong ties, and we share our commitment to deliver on the Paris Agreement. That is also why we welcome Minister Koizumi's proposal to establish an online platform to share COVID green recovery strategies and experience so that we can learn from each other. And we welcome also the idea of a ministerial meeting in September to that effect. About learning, let me say that we definitely would like to know more about the contents of the important recovery package that the Japanese government announced several weeks ago, and how it may contribute to put Japan on a path to a more ambitious set of climate goals, be it from 2030 or 2050. Thank you very much for your attention. And back to you, Professor.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. I've just received a message of someone who wants to know more about the Japanese recovery from coronavirus. And next, we're going to have a speech by Satoru Morishita, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of the Environment of Japan. Hi, my name is Morishita. Thank you for the introduction. It is my honor to be here. I would like now to start with my presentation. And as you have heard in the message of the Koizumi minister, we have to resume economy activities, and he said that we have to transform society into a resilient society. We've heard that the designing of the economy is important and indispensable. And this is why we need to have a transition to become a decarbonized society, a circular economy, and also a decentralized society. And these are the key factors. Maybe we can go now to the next slide. So first we have decarbonization. As an effort to recover from the coronavirus, on the 7th of April, the Cabinet approved an emergency economy package where, as a policy, we stipulated that we are going to facilitate a digital transformation and also a transition towards a decarbonized society, keeping an eye on a future society that is carbon-free. In terms of emergency economy packages, we have various fields, such as, for example, logistics, among others. And we have 4 different initiatives at the Ministry of Environment. The first initiative is regarding government buildings. And in this regard, we're going to centrally manage information about what companies and which parts are emitting how much greenhouse gases so that we can act upon it. So this will be one of the initiatives. Next, we have the Day Credit System Assistance Initiative. Day Credit System is done by using street management and also eco-friendly devices, so we are going to have a reduction of global warming gas. This will be satisfied by the country as a credit, and the country runs the system, and many operators are using this as a carbon offset. By having this system, the region that generates credits will have more funds coming into their local authorities, and this will help them. Next slide, please. Next point is logistics as a delivery hub, as energy station. As Koizumi mentioned, this is a brand new initiative. For example, in community stores, you have a wide use of delivery trucks. They will use electric vehicles instead. And we will also have electric vehicles that have replaceable batteries so that we can use logistic hubs as energy refilling stations. And we will establish a logistics model that will be decarbonized using renewable energy from the community. And we also can turn these delivery hubs into disaster prevention hubs. For example, if a community has a power cut, the community can gather in these hubs to charge their smartphones and obtain information in real time about disaster prevention. And this is another initiative that can contribute to the community. The 4th initiative is a supply chain reform to bring production sites to Japan. We will be required to have a decarbonized energy in order to do this supply chain reform and in order to supply energy to production sites. And based on the fact that we are going to have more severe disasters in the future, it is important to achieve resilient energy supply. It is therefore that in order to reduce the amount of initial costs to install solar panels, we are going to assist companies and operators that will be helping in that. Next slide, please. The fifth initiative is a circular economy. Japan was an advocate in 2004 at the G8 summit for 3 initiatives, which are reduce, reuse, and recycle. Japan has been meeting internationally efforts to move towards circular economy, such as the Summit 2020. As soon as possible, Japan are proposing the Ocean Vision by 2050 in order to have zero contamination. This has been born on consensus. We are going to work towards having a circular economy as soon as possible. In Japan, last year, we put in place basic resources recycling strategies already. And this is a way to respond to wider range problems such as a restriction on waste and resources, ocean plastic debris, global warming, and imports restrictions by Asian countries. We have also been in coordination with the Ministry of Economy to discuss these initiatives and strategies, and we are going to work on an initiative about technology and lifestyle. Next is a transition to decentralized society. There is a word, workation, that comes from work and vacation. And this is a concept which is a way of living by working and taking holidays at the same time in touristy destinations and resort places. As the Ministry of Environment, we are going to work on maintaining and securing employment in the tourism industry. And also we would like to promote and to facilitate workation as a way of life so that people can work from other destinations. Additionally, we're going to have financial assistance to operators so that they can prepare environments that are suitable for remote workers. And by doing this, we can have a sustainable economy within local communities. And once the coronavirus is over, I hope you can come to the national park in Japan and where you can have a new work life. Next slide, please. Yes, and finally we would like to talk about an online platform for climate change. At the end of April, Germany and the United Kingdom hosted an online dialogue on climate change. There we had Chancellor Angela Merkel, United Nations Secretary General Guterres, and officials from 30 countries to discuss about the coronavirus recovery and climate change. And the Minister of Environment, Koizumi, suggested an online platform for early September to the UNFCCC Secretariat on the 1st of June in a meeting called June Momentum. And in this meeting, we had to overcome 2 crises. Coronavirus and climate change, and international cooperation is indispensable. By exchanging information and opinions, we can work on those at the same time. We are going to have a conference in early September as an online platform and share information about recovering from coronavirus and countermeasures for climate change. Utilizing this platform, countries in the world can collaborate and coordinate to share information, and we can all together redesign the post-corona world. And this is important. Japan is willing to strengthen its contribution. Thank you, Murashita. Regarding the speech, we would like to have comments from experts now. From the European Union, Hein Breckelmans. He's the head of Sustainable Finance Desk, ABN AMRO Bank. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. I'm very happy for the close ties between Japan and the EU. I had the privilege to visit your beautiful country also in October last year. I'm very happy with the words of EU Ambassador Van Heukelen. I think this is a crucial moment for our society to take necessary steps to recover in a sustainable way and to get ready for that other crisis, meaning climate change. I really think that COVID-19 can be seen as the general rehearsal for climate change. I'm very happy that the European Union is taking action by means of a very important policy, and it's called the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy is something that is used by the European Union in order the financial industry is used to force in order for our economy to become more green, our European Union economy. It's a tool that provides clarity on what is environmentally sustainable activity and under which circumstances. It ends the fear of greenwashing, since we have a uniform definition on what is sustainable, and that's really a useful to have in the market. Furthermore, it's a measuring tool. It measures the degree of sustainability of an investment and of companies' activities, and it allows consistent reporting in order to compare apples to apples. It's a transition tool, so it helps investors and companies, so also the financial industry, but also the clients of the financial industry of the company I'm working for ABN AMRO. It helps to plan and report on the transition. It sets the objectives and the direction of travel for the different economic activities. It's a policy tool, so it's consistent within the EU environmental objectives and the goals of the Paris Agreement. It helps making informed decisions, developing more effective tools. And lastly, it's a dynamic tool. Like the EU ETS carbon market and EU sector policies, it will be updated and revised. And as Mr. Van Heukelen already said, it's used for, first of all, climate change mitigation, second of all, climate change adaptation, and in the future, it will be used for sustainable and protection of water and marine resources, the transition towards the circular economy, and the pollution and prevention of control. And lastly, the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. The implementation, however, is very challenging for the financial industry because we need data, and that's very challenging in order to get data from all the clients. But that's something that we are working on as a financial industry. And lastly, I think it's very important to have a universal language. So an impact language needs to be implemented. I'm very happy that Morishita-san told already about true price. We need to start to debate on impact and not solely on financial gains, but we need to talk about societal value and also about ecological value. Once we have a universal language within the European Union, then we can really start talking about impact. So that's my contribution for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Breckelmans. So
we're going to move on to the comments from the Japanese experts. And now I'd like to introduce the president of the Japan Center for International Finance, Rintaro Tamaki. So, Mr. Tamaki, the floor is yours.
Tamaki-san, the floor is yours.
Sorry, but I cannot answer this question. My interpretation is not working anymore.
Interpretation doesn't work anymore. I'm really sorry.
Okay, then Mr. Beckerman, maybe I can ask the question in English to you.
Okay, Mr. Beckerman, maybe I could pose a question in English to you then. So the Tamaki-san,
So Takamura, thank you for the introduction.
Takamura-san, thank you for introduction.
I've been listening to the initiatives of Koizumi Minister of Environment.
Of the Koizumi Minister
At the
of
end of
Environment.
last year, the new system
In
has
EU.
started, which is the European Union Green Deal.
At the end of last year, the new system has started, which is European Union.
And based on the Green Deal, they decided to facilitate and promote environmental measures. These are representing measures. And another strategy, representing strategy, is digitalization. If you see the European Commission website, the European Green Deal, after you can see that after the coronavirus crisis, there you can see the actions of this new deal that have been on track and are still running on time,
on track, without any delay.
And without any delay. In Europe, you are still discussing what the green activities are, or what could look like green, but it's not really green.
It looks like green, but then it's not really green.
Europeans have been working on sorting these activities, and they are now having real progress. And then now, suddenly, we have the corona crisis, and Europe has created an agreed recovery, and Europe is having a funding in this because it is an opportunity for them to achieve these goals. And compared to the European Union, we in Japan, we have not had specific directions in this regard. The European Union has put in lots of big budgets, and more importantly, they're going to have 1 trillion of corrective budget, and we are going to have corrective budget of 1 trillion. However, there are not so many countries which have real progress in terms of recovery and environmental activities. And this is something we need to keep into account for green recovery and recovery from coronavirus. And this is because we have to recover in alliance with what we have in the long term. Because otherwise, the efforts of our companies or the budgets that we may have will determine what kind of future we are going to have. Therefore, we need to take action in line with the long-term strategy that needs to be included into the budget distribution. We have 3 things that are required from the governments. First, we have climate change.
One is in terms of climate change.
Even if the European Union is going to work for the goal 2050, so we need to have a vision for 3, 4, 10, and 20 years.
A problem 1 year or 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
We have to present to the citizens what kind of plan we're going to have, and it has to be consistent.
What kind of plan we have, and we have to be consistent. Second is...
The second point is that right now the budgets and the finances are coming from private sectors and not the public sectors. So the private sector really needs a signal used in the market. The cost of emission converted into money, for example, carbon pricing and emission rights trading.
For example, carbon pricing and
it is very important for the government to work a step ahead on carbon trading.
It is important for the government to work on and have a step ahead in carbon trading.
This is not the only job of the Ministry of Environment, of course. The Ministry of Environment is very important. However, we also have agriculture, trading, tax, urban planning, and other areas which are also very important to establish countermeasures for climate change. This is called a policy alignment. We have to look on the same side, into the same direction, so that we do not stand in each other's way. Japan, as a country, does not set climate change countermeasures as a priority, at least not like the European Union does. However, I hope that the government of Japan will also focus on this area. Thank you, Tamaki, for your comments.
Thank you, Tamaki-san, for your comments.
Right now, we have just finished listening to the two keynote speakers. So now we would like to move on to open the discussion with the panelists. But before that, it seems that everybody is used to it.
It seems like everyone is used to it.
We've received some questions and comments.
We've received
if you have any questions and comments that you would like to be discussed, please send them via chat. You can write either in English or in Japanese.
You can write in English or Japanese.
And also in our registration, we received some questions. So now, based on those questions, I would like to ask these questions to every speaker. First, Mr. Ambassador Van Hoekelen. I have a question for you.
Ambassador Van Hoekelen, I've got one question.
The recovery package of the EU has been gaining awareness in Japan, and there are voices and audiences that say that they want to know more details about this. Especially the fields of interest are climate change and energy transition.
Climate change and energy transition are the fields of interest.
How can we translate these concepts into specific policies? These have something to do, I guess, with the Green Deal policies. So can you maybe elaborate a bit more about these viewpoints? Thank you.
Viewpoints, can you please elaborate? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Takamura. Indeed, with regard to the specificities, we have indeed clear ideas. Obviously, this will have to work through programming and through the ideas of our 27 member states. But the themes on which we would like to focus the green recovery on are pretty concrete. First of all, an acceleration of the installation of solar panels. Secondly, the renovation of buildings, in particular public buildings and social housing. In Europe, more than half of our buildings is 40 years old, if not older. They really need to be insulated quickly. Third, in order to make the electrification of transport happen, we now need to roll out quickly a massive plan of charging stations. We have in mind to put in place quickly 1 million charging stations in Europe. Further area will be the rollout of smart electrical grids. And then finally, afforestation. On top of that, there are some programs running that will take a bit more time, but nevertheless will be part of the Green Deal. One is obviously further onshore and offshore wind, and more spending with regard to research and development in areas where we know the future lies. We have already established a battery alliance in 2018. We're now going to launch a green hydrogen alliance. That's it.
Arigato, thank you. So now, especially when it comes to infrastructures, I understand that one of the biggest goals of these policies to have green infrastructures. So as the minister mentioned, including Japan, a big effort and budget is going to be used for this type of activity in the European Union. So how are you going to try to secure these funds for these activities and actions in the European Union?
It's a fair question. How are we going to pay for all this? As far as the European budget is concerned, that is in a way not so much an issue because we don't run deficits. However, we now have proposed a new instrument, a post-COVID scheme called Next Generation EU, which will have which has a proposed amount of 750 billion euro. Now, that money will have to be paid back because we're going to go for the first time to capital markets and borrow money. In order to pay for that, there are in a way three solutions. The first is our member states cough up more money, or we're going to spend less in future, or we're going to find new resources. And with regard to those new resources, we have proposed a number of potential candidates. One is a new plastics tax. Secondly, the extension of the emissions trading scheme, which, as you know, now fetches a price in Europe of more than 20 euros per ton, and the carbon border adjustment tax, in case some countries in the world would not raise their ambition with regard to emission reductions, and there would be the threat, the risk of carbon leakage, which we want to counter with this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which would also, of course, bring in revenue. Thank you.
Arigato, thank you. So next, I would like to ask questions to Morishita. The first question I have is the same as I had for the ambassador about the emergency countermeasures of Japan. We are now going to move on towards recovery with the digitalization and decarbonization. This is what you mentioned before, but in specific terms, climate change countermeasures in energy industries and transition or shifts of energy, what kind of countermeasures are you thinking of? This would be my question. Thank you. Thank you for your question. As Tamaki has elaborated, Japan as a government has the aim to recover from the pandemic, and here we're discussing additional budgets, corrective budgets, and after coronavirus, the society and economy of Japan has to be improved. So we need to further discuss how we can achieve these. And also within this time, we need to see what is necessary to have not only as a corona countermeasure, but also as a climate change countermeasures, which is another important global issue. We need to work on both things at the same time. There are a few important themes and efforts, as I mentioned before. We have for example, electric vehicles and eco-friendliness to reach this transformation. It is important to advance on these new technologies and make efforts both for the corona pandemic and also for the changes in climate change. Keeping an eye on post-corona time, the whole society needs to transition towards this new era, towards this new time. And as Tamaki mentioned, it is not only for corona, but also for climate change, and also for other fields such as agriculture. So these efforts are very much needed to move forward. So this is one of the things I would like to mention. And another issue is the fact that in a post-corona world, the world will have a new framework. And for example, the digital transformation or artificial intelligence or AI and all those cutting edge technologies. As human beings in our society, we need to discover how to handle these transformations. Also, we will need to be flexible as citizens, and our governments will have to indicate how we should move forward. The European Union is proposing their Green Deal, and Japan is proposing also an online platform to discuss this, and I believe these are very good starting points. This discussion now has to be taken deeper. Japan, together with the European Union and the international community, can collaborate together to see how we can transform our society, our post-coronavirus society, so that we can accumulate more experience for the near future after 2030. Now we are working on the SDG goals for 2030. But after 2030, we have to see what kind of society we're going to create. This is the discussion we need to have. These EU initiatives can work as a foundation, and that's why I would like to observe the efforts of the European Union and welcome them. Thank you. I don't know if it's only me, but yes, we have comments from different people in the audience about decarbonization. For example, those on the commitments by 2030, and we may need some review on our activities and efforts. So what opinion do you have about that? This March, Japan has held an NDC summit, as you all know. We wanted to communicate that we are not going to keep NDC as the state's current status, but we are going to be more ambitious about this. We would like to communicate to the world this very clearly. First, we would like to review our policies. This is the first thing we want to work on. Arigato, thank you. Next, I would like to have comments from the other two experts. First, Mr. Brickelman. In the ambassador's speech, there was a part that said that public funding is important, but private funding is also very important. We also need private investments. This is also a point that Tamaki mentioned. So, as a professional who works in the finance industry, when it comes to the current policy of the European Union, what kind of evaluation do you have? Would you see any points or areas that need to be strengthened in a certain way in order to have a recovery from coronavirus?
If I look in what is a very important field, of course, also of the European Union and also of our bank, is the transition towards a circular economy. But what we see when we compare circular companies to linear companies, and we have an economy that is steered by capital and by financial capital, we see a non-level playing field between circular companies and linear companies. Let me elaborate a little bit on that. First of all, it's an immature market, of course. Mostly it are new companies that are entering the market. And innovation and banks are not a happy marriage. So private money is needed, but then from an investor point of view and not from a finance point of view. So that's difficult. But what we also see is that if you compare linear companies to circular companies, the linear companies simply make more money due to, for instance, taxes. One of the points I'm trying to make within Europe, but also I try to make also in Japan in October, is that we need to change our tax system, and I think the European Union would be great to do that, because we need to tax resources and not labor. If you see that the circular economy is material extensive and labor intensive, and what we do in our European economy, 51% of our taxes comes from labor, and only 6% comes from material. In other words, we are stimulating companies to operate as linear as possible. So we need to make sure that by means of taxes, we shift that incentive towards using less materials and to use more labor. And I think this is the perfect timing because of the labor market, of course. There are a lot of people unemployed now due to the COVID crisis. So this is the ideal point. And if we change that tax system, that would be a perfect boost for the circular economy. And one other example of our accounting methods, we stimulate companies to depreciate as soon as possible to zero their assets. But in a circular economy, we say no assets remain value. So that's also contrary to, that's also in favor of the linear companies. So we need to make sure that we create a level playing field. And if that level playing field is there, I think that the financial industry, like ABN AMRO and all other banks, will start stepping in as well to start finance those companies. And it's not all policies, not all European. Also, we as a bank need to look at ourselves. We need to be more innovative and so on. But we really need the help of our governments and the European Union in particular. I hope that clarifies the question. Thanks.
Arigato, thank you. So first, I would like to now ask Tamaki. Earlier, you commented from a broader point of view that the large public funds are invested, and these financial inputs, in terms of how to use them, you mentioned that we need to have a long-term view in alignment with long-term goals. But how can we obtain them? Do you have any suggestion based on your background? The public investment funds are almost 1% obtained by national bonds, and this is unavoidable because it's based on the nature of the emergency. When the Japanese people's savings have been used in this form, we are using these budgets. This money could have actually been used more effectively, so that is a hidden cost. This is the procurement of public funds. To further elaborate, right now, I mentioned the three things the government has to do, but based on the discussion we are having right now, the most important would be the business people and long-term investors and finance people. These people are facing challenges that are in fact very severe. Actually, due to climate change, we are reviewing the traditional processes, see the industrial age of burning carbon and burning other resources to obtain energy. But in order to move out of that, we need to have a reformed society. And people's behavior and way of thinking will have to hugely change. And businesses have to adapt to this. So business people have to change the way they think and their business model if it is obsolete. And they have to think if their investments are going to be used in the same way. And also we have the problem of to see if they are responding correctly to climate change. If people can make use of funds, of the many funds that are at their hands, even if we have a lot of public funds being used, that would be a step ahead. And I can mention more details if there is a big concern. Like, for example, we can mention the air industry that has to do a lot with both with coronavirus and climate change. The air traffic industry. So the airlines industries are being rebuilt, are changing, are not the same as it used to be before coronavirus. And in this sense, lots of investments and businesses are now standing on a crossroad. It is also important to discuss public funds, but also it is very important to think of how investors and every company can maneuver or manage their businesses and their investments from now on. And that is something important to think about. Thank you for your points on these industries. Also about the air traffic industry. And in fact, the audience has been asking what kind of differences and responses has the EU given to the air industry. Based on Tamaki's opinions, I would like now to ask questions to Mr. Breckermans. In this recovery, private funding and investments have been important, I suppose. And now, Mr. Breckermans, what would you think? What kind of policy could we use for recovery? What kind of policy would facilitate private investments? This will be a question to Mr. Breckermans and also to Tamaki, the same question. So what kind of investments activities will we have in the future? And private investors, in order to expand their investments, what kind of Japanese government policy would be necessary in this regard to promote and to facilitate investors investing in these new fields? Quite thank you.
Union taxonomy, so this set of guidelines in order to make sure that we have a uniform definition, once again, because if you have this uniform definition and the investor world starts to ask about what part of your portfolio is sustainable, this is really helpful in making sure that more private money goes into this into the sustainable field of finance. I think I'm really positive about the way that the European Union sets the way with the taxonomy, with the uniform definition, prevents greenwashing. Just like I said in my opening 5 words earlier. I think this is really, I'm really happy for the European Union to have set that path for us. And that's it. Thanks.
Arigato. Thank you. The stimulus is important, but also even more important is to have a real guidance for the financial sector. And that is the direction of the European Union. I would like to ask the point also about this question to Tamaki about. As a guidance, the most effective signal is price. It is important to give a clear pricing signal, and I hope that the carbon pricing discussion will advance in Japan a bit more. Another thing is that business operators and long-term investors on the information, there are many companies making big different efforts in terms of climate change. And if they can disclose information comparatively, it would be really great. And the government has to assist that. In terms of information disclosure, as you mentioned, we will go to the discussion of taxonomy. We can't say this without any backing, saying that this is green or this is good for the environment if there is no clear indications. Taxonomy has clear indications with numbers of why things are good and green. From a global point of view, it will probably be very good, but Japan has not been working very vigorously in this field, and that's unfortunate. Lastly, all this stuff is really important, but also younger generations, not like me, but those young generations such as millennials, they have to have more discussions, and they should reflect much more on these policies. In the European Union, there are mechanisms naturally formed in order to get those inputs from younger generations. For example, there are political parties that are putting out green policies and are becoming very popular. I hope, or I wish, that younger generations can express more their opinions and older generations proactively reflect their opinions and ideas on the policies. I think this is important. Thank you. Right now, we have had EU and Japan papers and opinions about recovery from the EU and Japan. And based on their discussion so far, we've received many questions and comments through the chat. Japan and the EU and the international community, how can we collaborate towards the recovery? I would like to ask this question to all our panelists, to all of you. So now the question is, due to coronavirus, how are international relations going to be affected? And if Japan and the EU, will they have a strengthened partnership in this case? Which will be the area we will focus most? These will be the questions to the panelists.
me, right? On your latter point, what is it that we should focus or strengthen our cooperation on? Well, I think there are obviously two areas. One is on public health, how to make sure that we get a vaccine developed and administered as quickly as possible to our people, where obviously the World Health Organization will have to play an important role. And then secondly, indeed, compare notes about how we want to get out of the recession and make sure that this time around we spend the money for short-term purposes with an eye on the long-term objective of decarbonization. We have to spend money, we have to cut taxes, but our debt levels in a couple of years' time will be such that we cannot repeat this exercise anymore. And therefore, if you have only one bullet, you better make sure you shoot it right. And that is why I think a good exchange of views, as proposed by Minister Koizumi, is well taken. We have to step up that cooperation such that we become more resilient and more green. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to have comments from Morishita. In agreement with Minister Koizumi, and also in my presentation, we talked about three transitions: decarbonization, digitalization, and decentralization. And based on these, the most important is for the international community to cooperate to tackle these problems. In order to achieve these, we need to have transparency on information so that we can cooperate with each other. This is probably very important. For example, in science, it has to be respected in an effort to respect all the parties related. This is something I would like to emphasize. And in this case, information will be very important. Post-corona, in order to have a vision on how to use information, we need to think on how to use IoT and AI. There are advantages and disadvantages, but we need to see how we can make use of them effectively. For this, we need to create a society that is based on this. Thank you. How about you, Mr. Breckelmans?
Just this shareholder world, and I think that the other countries surrounding the other countries around the world are more driven by money, and I think that is something we share, and that we need to show the rest of the world that we are that you can also run a civilization not only by money but also by adding value. I hope that. Thank you very much.
Arigato, thank you. Next, we have Tamaki. The priority collaboration area is something I want to ask also, and because of the coronavirus, what kind of concerns do we have in terms of international relations? What kind of changes do we have? In 2008, when we had the crisis, as a person whose income is in the field, I established a cooperation of a worldwide network, and then there has been the establishment of a robust cooperation system all across the world. However, in this pandemic crisis, it did not go that way. the international cooperation did not go as smoothly as necessary. And this crisis can't be solved by ourselves, by each of the parties. If it does not finish for everyone, this will not finish for everyone. For example, in New Zealand, there is no longer infected people, but they cannot open their country because in this situation now, there are various reasons why we cannot advance in international collaboration. One of the reasons is that we do not have a common universal language. The relationship between the EU and Japan has advantages, which is that we are mind alike, and the basics in which we are thinking are very similar between us, and therefore there is a kind of dialogue that goes relatively smoothly. And as Morishita mentioned, scientific statistics do not happen between us. Therefore, Japan and the EU can, I believe, strengthen and deepen our dialogue. Thank you. We're approaching now the time to finish our session. And to conclude, I would like to ask all speakers to comment on something that they absolutely really want to communicate to our audience in regards to COVID-19 and green recovery. So we have a few minutes for something that you really want to emphasize to your audience. But before that, in the chat section, we have received many questions. We do not have the time to answer all of them. For example, we had issues such as cybersecurity, also the topic of Japan and EU resilience. Or the airline industry. I think that most of the questions people have asked could be maybe addressed in the webinars we have ahead of us. So the questions we've received will be transferred to the next webinars. So now, first, Ambassador, something you really would like to communicate to the audience?
Coming up in the chats. We don't have the time for that, but as you said, the next webinar should be able to address that. Now, what are the sort of things that I want to emphasize? I have already said that we have to make sure that the public money or the tax cuts that we're going to operate have to be green. But I would like to make one further essential point that has also been made by Mr. Bregelmans and by Tamaki-san, and that is the essence of the private sector. We can never decarbonize without the total mobilization of the private sector. And for that, there are three things that are essential. The first is a stable, long-term policy framework, that the private sector knows where we're going to. That is why we are going to revise our 2030 target from 40 to perhaps 50, 55%, and why we have said we want to be climate neutral in 2050. Then the private sector knows what the marching orders are. Secondly, the price of carbon. And Mr. Bregelmans has extended that to the price of raw materials. Basically, I mean, we know what it's all about. We have to internalize the externality. And for that, you need carbon pricing. We have established an emissions trading scheme. It would be good if Japan and others would go down that path as well. And thirdly, as has already been said as well, we need transparency in financial markets. That is why the taxonomy is so important, because it provides that sort of transparency that allows you to say that something is green or not green. It would be good if Japan could join the discussion on the taxonomy. We have established in October in Washington at the IMF, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. Quite a number of countries have joined: India, China, lots of countries around the world. Canada, we have just had the accession of Norway and of Switzerland. Singapore is very interested. Japan has been the leader on sustainable finance. It would be very good if Japan could also join the IPSF. Thank you.
Thank you. So now Morishita. Climate change is manifesting more and more. At the same time, our technologies are experiencing a big change. From now on, younger generations will lead this society, and they will enjoy a society in which they can have fun, they can work and enjoy their lives, and I think this is possible. In order to achieve that, we need flexible mechanisms, and this is important. There is a concept of hazards and risks. To eliminate hazards and risks, this is impossible. However, in terms of risks, hazards can multiply their exposure, and this will be the number of times that you get exposed to hazards. And by reducing this factor, we reduce the risk as a whole. For this, we have to utilize information effectively to maximize benefits and to minimize risks. And this is the society we need to have in the future. This is our challenge, and I think this is possible. Thank you. Next, how about you, Mr. Breckelmans?
Perfectly for me the 3 points he made out. For us as a financial industry, but also for the large corporates, for the consumers, for the whole European Union, it's very important to know where we are going in the longer term. So it's very important to have that. And if you give us that guidelines, they have given us by the EU taxonomy, but also by the percentage of climate, the percentage of CO2 reduction, also about the percentage of the circular economy. So that's very important. And I think it's very important that there's a lot of people who have said it already. I think COVID-19 is the general rehearsal for the bigger problem that's facing us, and that's climate change right now. And I think this is the moment to really make sure that our economy becomes more resilient for climate change. And so I'm really having very good. I'm really hopeful for the future to take the right actions right now. Thank you very much to participate in this webinar. Thank you.
Next, we have Tamaki-san. I would like to mention something which is different, especially for our audience in Japan. In this climate change discussion, if any of you have an interest in climate change, you may not have heard about taxonomy or international sustainable finance. There may be people who wonder about those terms. If you live in Japan, the discussions in continental Europe, especially discussions that originally come from Brussels, are not widely shared in Japan. I do not want to talk anyone's back, but we tend to take information from London and also European information. However, Brussels is really important for us. For example, in terms of personal information protection, let me notice that the responses by Japanese companies were running behind. It's not only for protection of personal information, but also digitalization. In Japan, the coverage for Brussels information is very weak. Therefore, I would like to suggest that you have more interest and information originating in Brussels. And this is something that I very much hope that will arise your interest. And I hope this was interesting to you. Thank you. Arigato. We've had a 90-minute session of papers and panelist discussions, so thank you to all of you for attending this session. So in response to coronavirus, we are working on a recovery, but at the same time, we have our nations, our societies, citizens, and our companies aiming at forming something new rather than going back to the state we had before coronavirus. And this is also the topic of these webinars. Today, it was all about having a broad-minded session. And after this kickoff session, we will be covering business connectivity, digitalization, international cooperation, climate change. These are the areas we can cover in future sessions. And the questions you have asked in today's session, I hope these will be addressed in the future. Minister Koizumi has mentioned the redesigning. We have to think of what kind of society and economy the EU and Japan are going to build in the long term. I very much hope that this webinar will serve as a starting point to think about that. And now I just would like to extend my deep appreciation to all the panelists and the audience for attending this webinar, and also the interpreters, our supporting office, Antonio, Pablo, and his team. I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation. So these are my concluding words. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Arigato.